Good morning.
Good morning.
Ladies and gentlemen, veterans, patriots, friends, family, and supporters of our nation's military, thank you for joining together today to recognize all those who have given the ultimate sacrifice to our great nation. What a privilege it is to be the guest speaker today and to help express the mutual pride that we all share for America's fallen servicewomen and men. I want to thank Forrest for arranging this beautiful venue and for giving us the opportunity to join here today. Throughout all cultures and all communities are stories of the warrior, the brave men and women who risked their lives to ensure that the community existed another day. These stories are shared and passed on in many ways. They are shared through sea stories between shipmates and across services and generations. They are revealed in the songs that tell the stories of battle, from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. These stories are memorialized in image, the flag being raised on Iwo Jima, and in music as the bugle cries taps. These stories are told through symbol as the rifle and boots, dog tags, and helmet of the battlefield cross create the memorial for those who were lost. Stories not only tell the tales, but they direct the futures of the ones who listen. Today, as we gather today to listen and to hear these stories, we remember our nation's men and women in arms. We remember the journey they took, to use as guidance in the journey that we will take. A sacrifice made in death calls for a sacrifice made in noble living. During the consecration of the National Cemetery at Gettysburg, President Lincoln told a story. He recounted what our nation was founded on 77 years prior. He went on to call us to this noble living. He said, "It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who have fought here have thus so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead, we take increased devotion to that cause which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That we highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall give new birth of freedom, and that a government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth." The stories are shared. The response is identified. A sacrifice made in death calls for a sacrifice made in noble living. Today, we gather to participate in the time-honored tradition of ritual and remembrance, as do many across this nation. Memorial Day was born out of this sincere sentiment to revere those who had gave all of themselves in defense of this nation. It is a special day designated for preserving the remembrance of our men and women who laid down their lives for our freedoms. Today, we pay homage to and recognize the fallen from all wars, conflicts, and actions who have preserved the freedom and our American way of life. We remember together. But who do we remember? What is it that we remember? Why should we remember? And how do we best honor them? We remember the great warriors who have shaped our history. Warriors like General Patton, Admiral Nimitz, General MacArthur. We hear of their lives and of their death and how they have become woven into the fabric of our nation's history. Some of my favorite stories to hear tell of the highest decorated Marine in history, a warrior who is credited with the proclamation, "We're surrounded." That simplifies the problem. The great Lieutenant General Chesty Puller.
Hoorah.
That's right, hoorah. Stories tell of the great warriors and illustrate that our warriors not only demonstrate valor, they empower, motivate, and inspire. These stories continue, and great warriors continue to emerge from this nation. Warriors of our day, like Corporal William Kyle Carpenter, the youngest Medal of Honor recipient. These stories continue to be told because our nation's military men and women continue to demonstrate that a sacrifice made in death calls for a sacrifice made in noble living. Today, we remember those stories we have heard and the stories we have not. Lance Corporal Olson is one of the many we remember here today. Daniel served in the United States Marine Corps and was known for his ability to memorize everyone's weapon's serial number. He liked to be part of the action but avoided the limelight. He was described as a silent professional, reserved, modest, efficient. On April 2nd, 2007, while protecting a critical position at the police station, Lance Corporal Daniel Olson was killed by sniper fire. A sacrifice made in death calls for a sacrifice made in noble living. We also remember the lives and stories who were lost beyond the battle of theater. Some are easier to remember, like those who lived fulfilling lives, those who became the veterans who continued to snap their bodies to attention and salute the flag with wrinkled hands long into their years. We readily recall the lives of those who told their tales of their days in uniform and inspired the next generation of warriors. Men like Colonel Wiley Taylor, a Marine who taught young men in Okinawa to play baseball, and through his team, the Sanyo Tigers, he helped the village of Kaio to rebound from poverty left in the wake of the war. He went on to guard the gates in 2002 at the age of 72. A sacrifice made in death calls for a sacrifice made in noble living. We also remember the more difficult stories. We remember those killed by friendly fire, those lost in tragic training exercises, and we remember those who served in combat yet continue to be tormented by demons, men and women who struggle with PTSD and the unseen wounds of war, who left the combat zone but still really haven't made it home. We remember the estimated 8,000 men and women who died by their own hand last year. From acts of valor to acts of anguish, we remember. These are the stories we remember as we gather as a community, as a nation. We gather and remember through ceremony. We pause and create space to engage in our rituals and traditions. We celebrate together on the 4th of July when we said we did it. We gained our independence. And we express gratitude on Veterans Day when we say thank you for what you have done and what you continue to do to our nation's men and women in arms. And today, we observe Memorial Day when we say to those who have sacrificed that we will now and we will always remember. These rituals not only offer us opportunities to reflect, but they teach the future generations the stories. They teach honor. They hold the call that a sacrifice made in death calls for a sacrifice made in noble living. One such day was the 3rd of July, 1999. I attended an annual community event with my family. Towards the end of the evening, the service of memory began. We gathered in the stadium and listened to the choir sing as the sky darkened in preparation for the fireworks display. Prior to the fireworks, the ritual of honor and remembrance began as all veterans were asked to stand as their service hymn was played. I watched, quite moved, as men and women stood up from the bleachers and rose up from blankets across the grass. I had grown up attending these kinds of events as a daughter of a veteran, so service was not foreign to me. But on this evening, something else transpired through the ritual that will forever be ingrained in my memory. The Marines' hymn began to play. Now, it's important to know that Marines stand at the position of attention when this is played, even as veteran Marines back home at a stadium in Orange. There was a group of young men a few rows in front of me. They were acting like a typical group of 18 to 20-year-old guys, out having a good time, big gestures, the not so infrequent playful shove. And as the hymn began to play, one of these young men began to stand. At the same moment, I saw the hunched over body of an elderly man being helped to his feet by who I assumed to have been his wife and son. As the first few notes were played, both of these men shifted their bodies solidly to the position of attention. Standing before me was contrast and unity. Contrast in a man who suddenly emerged, surrounded by the youth of his peers, and the once frail body who struggled to his feet stood with his hands pressed solidly against the seam of his pants, with his walker untouched in front of him. The bodies of a 19-year-old and a 90-year-old suddenly became living memorials to every Marine since 1775. These rituals have an impact. 6 months later, I was standing on yellow footprints. A few months after that, I had earned the title of Marine. We remember because there are stories that lie beneath these flags that may never have been told, that should never have been needed to be told. These stories tell the often unspoken cost of war, stories of grief, horror, and witness to terror. These stories witness to the brokenness and evils of humanity and host the darkest nights of the soul. These stories show what we fight against. As a therapist working with veterans, I hear these stories. When I lived in Riverside, I would often go to the Medal of Honor Memorial after particularly dark days. There, the walls were lined with the names of 3,487 men and 1 woman, 19 of whom received this honor twice. Within these stories lay witness to the capacity for human love and dedication. These stories show what is worth fighting for. We remember all our nation's stories because both of these stories show us possibilities, glimpses of what could be, compassion or terror. These stories show what is possible in humanity, and so we remember to keep alive the spirit of this country and to be reminded of what military men and women in arms, as believers in this nation, stand to ensure and fall to protect. A mentor and friend of mine, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, signed his book with the inscription, "Remember to Remember." This seemed odd for a leading trauma researcher to write in the book of a therapist working with veterans. After all, those who are haunted by the demons of war remember. They remember all too well. I would learn that this isn't a message to the haunted or to the fallen. This is a charge for those who are the beneficiaries of the sacrifices made. This is a commission to our nation to not only remember all the servicemen and women who have fallen in defense of our nation's freedom and way of life, but to respond to noble sacrifices and death through noble sacrifices and living. Our nation's warriors did not die so that we might merely be free, as though freedom has no greater end than self-concern and self-centered consumption. Rather, they died that we might live in free and dedicated pursuit to the noblest of ideas, that each person holds inherent dignity, and consequently that a government of the people, by the people, and for the people means a nation of mutual concern, where each person, whether rich or poor, young or old, whatever race or creed, remembers that we are all responsible to one another for creating a story of opportunity and a society with justice for all. Their deaths remind us that this ideal will not survive on its own. They remind us that the glory of our nation is not found in the past, but in an as of yet unfinished future that must be pursued. Because a sacrifice made in death calls for a sacrifice made in noble living. As Lincoln said, so their sacrifice reminds us that this nation under God is yet in need of new birth. because even a single sacrifice made in death shows that we have not yet achieved our goal. As we take hold of our cultural inheritance embodied in the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, let the stories of those who died remind us that our inheritance is incomplete until what we strive for as a nation is indeed what we have achieved. A nation standing indivisible with liberty and justice for all. As we gather this Memorial Day, we remember the stories. We remember those who have sacrificed. We remember what was sacrificed, and we remember why. And we remember that we have the responsibility to honor that sacrifice made in death through our sacrifice made in noble living. Remember to remember. Thank you.